So that's a wrap on March Madness. Just in time for April Insanity, because just a few blocks from this theater, the former president is back. He is here, and I know, it's all thanks to last Thursday's news that the former president had been indicted by a Manhattan grand jury on more than 30 counts related to business fraud. You can see it all. Something. You can see it all in the hot new show, Law and Order, ha ha ha. Ha ha. So it's a sad, sad, happy day for America because for the first time in our history, a president has been indicted for paying off a porn star. How are we going to explain that to our grandchildren? Hopefully in the book, Donald and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad NDA.
Stand up.
From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, how to keep your cool at the next visit to the auto mechanic when the ego turf war goes awry. And now, the podcast host who has no worries for such things because his car is like a self-cleaning oven on wheels, Pete Dominic!
Oh yeah, you got it right again, Pico. 2 Chevy Volts and a Honda CR-V. Pick a car, and they are all clean as a whistle because of the way that I maintain them in tip-top shape each and every day. And even including Pete Coe's car. I've even repaired Pete Coe's car. That's right, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, where I will be joined by both Michael Cohen again, because we got an argument on Twitter, and I wanted to invite him on and have it on the podcast about whether or not 60 Minutes should have had Marjorie Taylor Greene on and how they did the interview, how Leslie Stahl conducted the interview. So if you want to hear that, that's coming up right here at the top. And after that, I had a great conversation with Qasim Rashid, who I love talking to. He's got a Sirius XM show. He's a lawyer. He's a former candidate for office. He may be a candidate for office again. And I think you're going to love that conversation with him. So both Michael Cohen, no, not that one, and Qasim Rashid joining me today. And, of course, all of you. Great to have all of you. I had a very busy day yesterday conducting interviews, so I didn't really get to pay a lot of attention to the news. But apparently the news was all focused on Donald Trump's airplane and then his car. I really barely turned it on, but apparently they were going wall to wall on Trump yesterday. CNN had the number of people who support the indictment at 60%. So that's a pretty big deal. And on Tuesday, the big election in Wisconsin, everybody, consequential election determining whether Wisconsin's Supreme Court will preserve its 4-3 conservative majority or will it flip to liberal control. If you're in Wisconsin, Odessa, and everybody else, get out there and vote. In February, the contest became the most expensive court race in U.S. history. The Democracy Campaign estimates today it stands at $39.7 million spent on this campaign. So a major election in Wisconsin today. Very, very consequential. Obviously, Trump will be arraigned today on 34 felony accounts. There's going to be a press conference from the Manhattan DA, and apparently Trump is supposed to have his own press conference. So Tuesday is set up to be a very busy news day. But what I've got for you today, I think is pretty good. Some people might argue that it's not that important whether or not 60 Minutes had Marjorie Taylor Greene on, but it was a very, very heated debate on social media yesterday with a lot of smart progressive people that I like going at it against each other. But Michael Cohen was out there arguing that Leslie Stahl did a real good job, and 60 Minutes, of course, should have had Marjorie Taylor Greene on. And so I'm going to start with that conversation right now. If that's not an issue, an argument that you're interested in, you want to get to my very thoughtful, nuanced discussion with Qasim Rashid, that begins at about 34 minutes in, if you want to fast forward, jump ahead. But let's get it started with his second appearance in just a few days here on the show. Michael Cohen, of course, a former Boston Globe columnist. Now he runs the Truth and Consequences Substack, and he writes there. And I love reading and listening and talking to Michael Cohen, even arguing with him as I try to do that in this conversation. So I hope you appreciate it. I think this is worth it. I think this is worth it, or else I wouldn't have done it. I understand some people might not, but Michael and I had a great back and forth. It never gets personal, it never gets ugly, but you know, I was pretty much holding my ground. He made some good points, and you might agree with him, you might agree with me. Either way, it's one of those conversations. So let's get to it right now. Of course, follow Michael on Twitter at SpeechBoy71. Let him know that you heard this and how you feel about it. Attack him there, hopefully. And he welcomes it all, and I was very happy to do this. So let's go right now. Michael Cohen.
All right. Michael Cohen joining me now after just now, but not only posting a tweet, but writing an entire piece for his Substack in defense of 60 Minutes Leslie Stahl, having Marjorie Taylor Greene on the great show last evening. Thank you for being bold enough to come on such a hard-hitting show like mine to defend yourself.
Okay. Always happy to be on, Pete.
Do you feel nervous and intimidated before we start? Where do you feel?
I don't. Sorry. Nothing to do with you, Pete.
Okay, well, let me just read
I don't get nervous and intimidated. So, there you go.
Ever?
Sometimes, but rarely.
Okay. Here's a little background that I gathered on Marjorie Taylor Greene real quick. She's been criticized in recent years for promoting a number of QAnon conspiracy theories before she took office. She was removed from a House committee in 2021 after she questioned the events of 9/11, endorsed suggestions the 2018 shooting at Stoneman Douglas was fabricated, and called to execute Democratic leaders in Congress. She also falsely claimed that John F. Kennedy Jr., who died in a 1999 plane crash, was killed by Hillary Clinton. Twitter most recently restricted Greene's account after she shared an image referring to the Trans Day of Vengeance in response to the gender identity of the suspect who carried out a mass shooting in Nashville last month. Her account was also previously permanently banned last year after it was flagged for having posted misinformation about COVID-19, though it was later restored after Elon Musk's takeover the social media platform. And of course, she's called for basically the United States to divorce most recently. Michael, I just want to read a couple of reactions, including yours, and then I'll turn it over to you. Mary Trump last night on this. Leslie Stahl's interview isn't a one-off atrocity. It's just one symptom of the media turning a blind eye to fascism. In just the last 2 weeks alone, the mainstream media has refused to recognize the threat posed by the Republican Party and its de facto leader, Donald Trump. Norm Ornstein wrote, I have known Leslie Stahl for more than 40 years, worked alongside her for many election weeks. She's been a great journalist, but this is a disgraceful, cringeworthy performance. Shameful to the max. Ben Collins, NBC. Oh my God, what are we doing here? Former West Wing actor Bradley Whitford compared Greene to Adolf Hitler, who wasn't afraid to share his opinions, adding, it was too bad Leslie Stahl was unable to interview Hitler. And finally, Elie Mystal criticized 60 Minutes announcement for referring to Greene by her nickname MTG, suggesting it was a cute moniker that just shows you're here to launder her rep and be complicit. And Michael, you tweeted, Marjorie Taylor Greene deserves a fair shake, and 60 Minutes gave her one. She is now an influential congresswoman and deserves to be heard and also seen lifting weights. I have nothing but respect for Marjorie Taylor Greene, Leslie Stahl, 60 Minutes, and for some reason, Les Moonves. Why did you write that?
That is fake news. Let's be clear about that point. I did not say that.
Oh.
So let me be clear.
I'm sorry. What was it that you tweeted?
I said that people who were upset about CBS 60 Minutes giving Marjorie Taylor Greene a platform are wrong. And they're silly. And they're embarrassing themselves. Because the thing you left out of your description of Marjorie Taylor Greene that's very important is that she is a member of Congress and a very influential member of the Republican Party. I don't like Marjorie Taylor Greene. I find her views abhorrent. I wish she would go away, but she's not going to. And she plays a very influential role in the Republican Party. And I have zero problem with 60 Minutes profiling her and exposing her views to the rest of the country, which they did, I thought, quite effectively on Sunday night. And I just would add that 60 Minutes over the years has platformed Saddam Hussein, Ayatollah Khomeini, Timothy McVeigh, Jack Kevorkian, when he killed somebody after they gave him a video, he gave him the video of him killing somebody. So they've platformed lots of people.
And you're a fan of all those people as well?
Yeah, I love all those people. Also talked to Louis Farrakhan for like 30-minute interview. Another toxic, awful human being. And somehow the Republic survived. And I guess the point I would make here is that journalism is about exposing both the good and bad in our society. And if there are people who are influential, like Marjorie Taylor Greene, or have people who I think it's helpful for Americans to know about because of the influence they have and the power they have, that's what journalism should do. So I have zero problem with CBS talking to her. I think the interview there are criticisms you can make of the interview itself. But the idea that talking or platforming her, which is a ridiculous word, by the way, is somehow dangerous. It's childish and silly. And
why is platforming
Americans can't on their own listen to her comments and decide this person is crazy?
Well, you think Americans can. You give Americans the credibility. A lot of people would say...
I'm not one that usually gives Americans a ton of credit on stuff like this, but as I point out in the piece, extremist Republicans like Marjorie Taylor Greene have been rejected across the political spectrum for the past 3 elections. I know you're going to say 2016, that's fine. 2018, 2020, 2022. I'm of the view that sunshine is the best disinfectant, and hearing people speak and hearing what they believe is a good thing because it exposes them for the toxic views that they have.
You think that 60 Minutes, this highly respected news program, giving her... Why do you think platforming is a bad word?
It's called journalism, Pete. That's what journalists do. They talk to people, even people who do bad things. Ed Bradley interviewed Timothy McVeigh on death row. Killed 169 people. His views were atrocious. But it was deemed important enough to hear what he had to say. CBS put him on the air. I have no problem with them doing that. I have no problem with them talking to people who, like a KKK Grand Wizard. I don't agree with them, obviously, but I have no problem that having a journalist talk to them. That's what journalists do.
You're offering your platform, your limited space to someone with such horrible views.
Okay, so
dangerous views.
That means everyone that CBS has on has to have great views, and great views by whose standards? I mean, I think by anybody's standards, Marjorie Taylor Greene has terrible views. She's a bigot. She's an idiot. She says horrible things about people. But, journalists, I don't know that we want journalists making the call about people's views are outside too unacceptable to have on the air, especially when that person represents a significant chunk of the American public, who a lot of people watch 60 Minutes probably never exposed to. I mean, Marjorie Taylor Greene is not well known by most Americans.
Oh, come on.
No, she's not. I was talking to somebody earlier who said she's got about 10% name ID. She's not well known. People on Twitter know her.
Now she is because 60 Minutes just showed her to the world.
Okay, you're right. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
They did not.
Is it a good thing to have her on 60 Minutes calling Joe Biden a pedophile? Is that going to make her seem more popular or less popular?
It would be one thing if they didn't just let it sit there, to the point that Steve Bannon went on his show today and praised Leslie Stahl, thanking her for not challenging her.
No, but you're right. There's no more honest broker than Steve Bannon. So I think that's to be taken very seriously.
When I think he should be taken extremely seriously.
Okay. I don't think that comment should be taken seriously.
Because I've been drawing you out here. Let me make some more specific criticism. First of all, I think people should generally agree to the great point that you made and you wrote about in your Substack. listing all of these horrible people that 60 Minutes has interviewed in the past. Most people, I don't think, are arguing that point, and I think you make.
No, they are. They absolutely are. They are saying she should not be platformed. They're saying because her views are too toxic.
My view is not that she shouldn't be platformed, but if they're going to give her a platform, they give it in such a context, illustrating the danger, illustrating a much more robust context with what she has done and what she said, as opposed to what seemed to me a hagiography. They filmed her lifting weights. They called her, they normalized her in so many ways. And I am astonished.
They also pointed out that she thinks this should be a Christian nation. They point out that she thinks abortion should be banned nationwide. They point out that she wants to stop all immigration for 4 years. They pointed out that she thinks Joe Biden is a pedophile. They pointed out that her views on the debt limit are glib, was the words that. And
did a terrible job as to pointing out in the moment. She was so not up for the task, Leslie Stahl.
Let me finish. They showed video of her harassing a survivor of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting. I guess I don't understand.
By the way, the one time where I thought 60
was a hagiography when it was basically just pointing out the dumb things she said over the past several years, including calling her a moron at one point, or saying people call her a moron. I just don't get it. And I guess
what.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I thought that it was weird. And now I want to defend Marjorie Taylor Greene for 1 second in that interview. When they showed her harassing David Hogg, they said she was harassing a survivor of a shooting. I thought that was a little bit disingenuous. David Hogg has been a huge activist and the most outspoken guy. And once you put yourself out there as an activist, you're no longer just, quote, a victim. I didn't love that they weren't more specific as to this guy, but.
I mean, okay. I don't know. I was okay with that, I guess.
All right.
I see the point. The point.
But what you don't think there needs to be more context there about who he was?
Not really. No.
So to the point of her not doing a good job at pushing back, like the pedophile moment, she just rolled her eyes and gasped. I mean, there's,
I think this comes down to a very different point of view about what the job of journalist is, or what they're supposed to do in a situation like that. I mean, I watched that video and I watched her say to her, she said to her, literally, they're not pedophiles in reference to Democrats. Those were her exact.
I understand, Michael. I understand. We understand drawing somebody out and letting them make their case and letting them hang themselves. But I think that you have to. I also think that you have to provide a fact check as much as you can, and it's not hard to be prepared for that with someone like her. I mean, there's two types of ways to do interviews. There's the way that Leslie Stahl did it and the way that someone like Mehdi Hassan does it.
Right. So I guess the thing I'd say about that is I think there's a fair criticism to be made that once she repeated the line about Democrats being pedophiles and because they support trans rights, that there should have been a voiceover pointing out that that's bigoted and wrong.
At least, yeah.
But I also think that I come to this from a different place than I think other people do, which is that I don't really appreciate the kind of journalism that just kind of batters the person around to get the same answer over and over again. Because I don't care how many times Leslie Stahl asks the question, you're going to get the same answer. And I frankly found it more effective for Leslie Stahl to just be exasperated, befuddled, and amazed by the comment, because I think it exposes how insane the comment is. I mean, you had her on TV calling Joe Biden a pedophile. Now, Steve Bannon might think that's great. I don't think most Americans would agree with that or think it's great or think more highly of Greene because of it. I think it makes them look at her as somebody who's a kook, because she is. So I guess I have a little more confidence that people can watch an interview like that and draw the right conclusions. And I guess the idea that she should have pushed her on it. What is she going to say? What answer do you think you're going to get that from Dr. Taylor Greene? She can make the same points over and over again. I think the criticism is fair that there should have been a better explanation as to why that was wrong. But I don't know that her getting in a fight with Leslie Stahl is going to make people change their minds about her.
But it doesn't have to be a fight. You even made the point of when it's a television interview, you can take a break from the interview to fact check. And you and I think, probably disagree about what Republicans think of Democrats in this country. Like at the town level, we're groomers, we're pedophiles. Like at every point that insinuation is made, the pushback should be so vociferous and it is a horrific thing to say. And it puts people, including me, because I've been called pedophile a number of times, in danger. It puts you in danger. It's a terrible thing to say. And you and I disagree on how many people think that. Republicans, a lot of Republicans think that Democrats are groomers and pedophiles.
Okay, you're right. And
it needs to be completely destroyed in that moment for her to just sit there and roll her eyes. I understand your interpretation, but obviously,
do you think that Leslie Stahl explaining at that moment that is wrong will change the minds of people who think that Joe Biden's a pedophile?
I think that there's a billion things that Leslie Stahl could have said to draw out a better answer than the one she allowed her to give. Oh, another follow-up? Yes. In that case, when you're saying, I mean, by the way, she said Joe Biden is a piece of shit into a camera and shared it on social media. No sign of that. No sign of so much of the horrible stuff.
This is the criticism I dislike the most, because I don't even know what she talked about Jewish space lasers. I mean, there are 100 different ways you can criticize.
All of that shit. If you're going to introduce,
you're not going to get everything into a segment like this. You're just not. So
they had time to fit in her doing squats, but not the 3 seconds of her saying the current president of the United States is a piece of shit as one of the most influential people in America. They had time of showing her at a construction site, but they couldn't slip in another one of her comments.
Right, because what you want is for this piece to just be the destruction of Marjorie Taylor Greene. That's not what 60 Minutes is doing. They're doing a profile of her. They're talking about her rise to political prominence, how this came about, and they're trying to also push her on her views. And I guess the thing is, it's a different understanding of journalism. You want the journalist to be an activist, to be an advocate. That's what you want. That's what people criticizing this want.
No.
They want, you do. You guys want there to be, here's all the terrible things she said, let's expose that. That's not how 60 Minutes operates.
I want a show like 60 Minutes to give a much more contextual view of who this person is.
They did. That's why they showed all the stuff about her exercising at her construction company. That's why they showed that. To show like the context of who she is, how she got to this point. It's a profile. It's not like she's a terrible person. Let's talk about that for 20 minutes. That's not what the point of the piece is. Of
course, you're right about what journalism is and what this was. What you're not right about is how they decided to do it. We can agree on what journalism is. We can agree on what is a profile. But what we can't agree is a show like this one sending this journalist to do a piss poor job and to make her seem a lot more gentle and kind and harmless than she actually.
Look, different strokes, different folks. That was not how she came across to me. She came across as thin-skinned.
The argument is different strokes for different folks.
I don't agree with your interpretation of the interview. I thought she came across as thin-skinned. I thought she came across as not empathetic. I thought she came across as kooky. I thought she came across as angry. I didn't think it was an effective interview for her. Now, I completely understand people have a different point of view about this. And as I said before, I don't think it was a perfect interview. The thing that I would have done differently, I probably would have pushed her harder on some of these questions. I wouldn't have focused on the debt limit stuff that she talked about. But that notwithstanding, I don't feel as though it's weird for people to say that she came across as gentle. I don't feel that way. And I don't think most people who saw her call Joe Biden a pedophile, are going to think of her as a gentle person. I think she comes across as a kook. And I think if I was a national Republican, if I'm Speaker McCarthy, the last person that I want on 60 Minutes talking about the Republican Party is her, because she's an embarrassment to the party, because she's a extremist who holds terrible views. And I guess in a weird way, it's like Democrats almost want her to be on TV. They exposes the extremism of the modern Republican Party in a way that, a different politician would not.
I'm actually not talking about what Democrats or progressives or people who don't like Marjorie Taylor should want. You're talking about the people that are reacting that way, and I hear you. I'm talking about journalism.
You are talking about what they want, because you're kind of saying what you thought they should have talked about.
I'm talking about as a
Why?
journalist.
Because you want to see them expose her for the terrible toxic views that she has. Why?
As a journalistic outfit, absolutely is because when you give her that much seriousness and that much respect, that show in particular, I mean, cable news shows wouldn't even necessarily do such a profile. They would do definitely. Jake Tapper would have definitely done a harder hitting interview. Wolf Blitzer would have than Leslie Stahl did.
I don't know about that.
She loved it, by the way. Marjorie Taylor Greene loved it.
She wants the attention. It's great for her. It's great for her. She becomes a national figure. It's great for her.
So is it great for her, or is it like, I feel like you're saying it's bad for her and it's good for her?
With the same way that Donald Trump being indicted is good for his prospects in the Republican Party and bad for his chances of being elected president in beating Joe Biden in 2024. Right? Two things can be right at the same time. I think it's good. I think from her perspective, it's good for her national profile. Is it good for Republicans that she is a prominent figure in the party? I don't think so. And, I guess if I didn't know who she was, and most Americans do not know who she is, and I watched that interview, I don't think I'd come away from it thinking, boy, this is someone I want to see in a position of national power. I'm sort of shocked that people who are liberals think that that's the takeaway from that interview. I find it kind of bizarre, actually, because she comes across pretty badly in the interview. And, not just that, but like Stahl exposes many of her very toxic views and challenges her on them. So I'm just baffled by it. I don't get it. I mean, I'd love to see a focus group on this thing, but I can't imagine people watch that and they're like, yeah, she's great. She seems really normal.
I mean, in the interview, she talks about being radicalized. Her dad played Rush Limbaugh, and she says, I listen to Rush Limbaugh, talk radio, and that's what I learned. That's exactly what I think that interview does. I think that interview is a way of selling her ideas. America's a Christian nation. Leslie Stahl's like, that's not what the founders thought.
Already sold her ideas.
Yeah, they did. And she's like, okay, next subject.
Hold on, Pete. She already has sold her ideas. She's the one of the most popular Republican surrogates.
Right. And she sold them even more to the audience that you say didn't know her. You think the 60 Minutes audience looked at that and was like, oh, my God, I never heard of this woman, but she's crazy. I think that those clips.
I'm really intrigued by her arguments about Joe Biden being a pedophile. How do I subscribe to her newsletter? That's what you think? I don't.
I think absolutely people will take those clips and clip them up, and they will create more people that believe like her.
I doubt that. I really do. But maybe you're right. I don't know.
Have a big 60 Minutes thing in the corner, giving her legitimacy.
Okay, and she already has legitimacy. I mean,
she's got more now that
this is part of the argument too. This is like a little liberal bubble. Oh, we can't give her exposure. She has exposure. She's a popular surrogate, a popular fundraiser. She is a highly influential figure. Well, let me finish. Highly influential on the Republican Party. She has a platform. Okay? The idea that 60 Minutes legitimized her, bullshit. She already has that from the Republican Party, from Donald Trump, from McCarthy, who gave her 2 committee chairmanships because he supported her in the speakership fight. She has that already. Okay? What she's getting now is national exposure, which is pointing out that her views are terrible.
Not to those who would be convinced of them.
Okay, but they're not watching 60 Minutes. They already look.
Yes, they are.
Like any other Green.
Yes, they are. This idea that you think that we live in a world where people get their news from TV and not the internet. Here's what happens: someone goes on a TV show, Michael, and then the clips get shared all across.
I'm aware of that.
Platform.
I'm aware of that.
It doesn't seem.
And I guess my question to you is that clip of her calling Joe Biden a pedophile. Do you think that being shared is a good thing for her?
I do.
Okay. Well, we
do. I think that is an idea that has become so viral and dangerous, accompanied by pictures of Joe Biden touching kids, and everybody who's a Democrat, as she was allowed to make that point, you support pedophiles, you are a pedophile. Same thing, by the way. It's not the same thing, but okay.
How many Republican candidates ran on Joe Biden being a pedophile won in 2022? How many of them? How many of them ran on trans issues?
Donald Trump absolutely insinuated that Joe Biden was a pedophile. I don't know.
How did he do?
Amazingly well, dangerously well.
He lost re-election.
He got more votes.
He lost re-election.
He got the second most votes that anybody that ever ran.
He's the third incumbent in the last what? No.
I mean, do you think
the last 100 years to lose re-election?
Well,
I can't remember now, third or fourth.
Let me make this final point, which is because I'm more thinking about spreading ideas and legitimizing ideas. That's, I think, my big concern here. And when people constantly talk about giving Donald Trump airtime in 2016, they were painted as being guilty parties, from Les Moonves to CNN. Are you one of those people? Do you agree with that? Do we give too much airtime to Donald Trump?
How do you not give airtime to the Republican nominee for president?
You give airtime to him, I think, but but too much. Like, for example, right now they're going wall to wall on his plane.
Do you think that's good for him?
He won as a result of all of the coverage that he got, because enough Americans are terrible that they would vote for a man who said,
I hear this argument.
It's okay to grab women by their pussy. He won on that.
I hear this argument.
Seem like Americans see these views and they're disgusted by them. And I wish I agreed with you.
When I hear this argument, I almost want to say, do you know that there have been 3 national elections since then? That in 2018, Republicans lost 40 seats in the House? That in 2020, Donald Trump lost presidency and the Democrats won the Senate? That in 2022, Republicans underperformed in large part because they had crazy extremist candidates? Like, all those things happened. You can keep dining on 2016 as the ultimate example of what happened in American politics, but it's a fluke. It's a fluke. And if you look at the last 3 elections, that's a pattern. A pattern of behavior, a pattern of voting behavior.
I agree that it was a fluke. I don't like you're clever. You can keep dining out on that argument. That's where I felt most offended in this interview. And that's where I really got triggered.
I didn't mean to trigger you, Pete. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was a microaggression, I think. But I agree with you that it was a fluke. What I think what I disagree with you on is the amount of attention, the amount of respect that they're being given, and it normalizes them and it spreads those ideas.
I don't like this expression, normalize. I don't agree with it. I don't understand it. You cannot do journalism, okay, without talking to people whose views are abhorrent. Not in our current political system. Republican Party is a party full of people with abhorrent political views. Should we never talk to them? Should we never normalize them? It doesn't work this way, okay? You can't ignore these people. And I would make the argument that one of the takeaways from the last 3 election cycles is that the more these views have been brought to the forefront and exposed, the worse those people have done. That's the point that's the overarching point here. People might want to talk about 2016 as if it's the end all be all of national elections. It's not. Okay. A lot of extremist Republican candidates, 2022 is a perfect example. A year in which inflation was high and Democrats should have gotten their asses kicked, and they didn't. Why? Because a lot of extremist candidates, who, by the way, should we not talk to them either? We should talk to Herschel Walker in Georgia because he's a kook? No. I would argue that putting Walker out there helped Democrats and hurt him because he's not a smart person and he has some crazy views.
Well, I got it. Well, listen, here's what I'm hearing. You support Herschel Walker, Marjorie Taylor Greene, 2024. That's the ticket you'd like to see. We've got to go. Unfortunately, we're out of time for you to answer that. But yeah, Walker Greene, Michael Cohen, thank you. No, go ahead. Last word. Anything you want. Obviously, you wrote a whole stack about it. Is there a point that you
Taylor Greene? I support neither of them. I don't take political positions, generally speaking, but I don't.
Love Leslie Stahl.
I'm sorry?
Big Leslie Stahl fan.
I thought she did a great job.
Oh, wow.
For the most part. There were some things I would have done differently.
That's the only part I'm going to clip out of this interview.
Okay.
That it? Any final words? You wrote a piece about it. I'll let you go.
That's it. That's all I got.
Awesome. This was fun. Thank you very much for giving us a different point of view than the terrible, terrible point of view. Thank you.
Thank you, Pete.
All right. I thought that was a great exercise. I hope that you appreciated it. Let Michael know at SpeechBoy71 right now. Go subscribe to his Substack, truthandconsequences.substack.com. Truth and Cons. You can get it there. All right. Now it's time to get to my second guest of today's show. I originally was going to be talking to until I saw Michael's argument and an article at his Substack. So now it's time to get to human rights lawyer, author, executive director of Common Purpose, an organization dedicated to electing more women and underrepresented Americans to office. He's the host of his own SiriusXM show on Urban View. That's Sundays at 10 a.m. East on SiriusXM's channel 126. He's an author and so much more. I was very happy to have him. Go check him out at QasimRashid.com. I love talking to this guy. He's a really nice guy, very smart guy, has been doing great work for a real long time. A proud immigrant raised in the Chicago area. He and his wife live there now with their 3 children just outside Chicago. And I'm always excited to see what's next with Qasim Rashid, who you should follow, you should subscribe, you should listen to. Here is our conversation. Let's do it.
And Qasim Rashid, what do you say? Happy Ramadan, Eid Mubarak or something?
Eid is a holiday at the end of Ramadan. So you can't preempt the Eid Mubarak. You got to do Ramadan Mubarak first.
Oh.
Them's the rules, Pete.
Ramadan Mubarak to you and your family.
Shad Mubarak to you and your family as well.
Well, what is it, really? What is the holiday? Is it one you look forward to? Where do you put it in the rest of the holidays, and how do you observe it? Tell us, convert us.
The holiest days of the year for Muslims. So Ramadan, it's on the lunar calendar, and it's the holy month of fasting. This is the month where Muslims believe that God revealed to the Prophet Muhammad that he is that prophet foretold in old scriptures and all the goodness that comes with that. And so this was the beginning of the revelation of the Quran. And so this is a month that Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset for the 30 days of the month, abstain from food, water, intimacy with your spouse. You increase your charity, your service to humanity. You try to break any bad habits. You increase your prayer. It's really a powerful month of self-reflection and self-improvement. I look forward to it. The older I get, the more and more I look forward to it. And
I don't like it.
Well, you can't have any then. I'm sorry.
Seems like it's a lot of work there. I want to.
It is, but it's such a great reset button, Pete. Like it forces you, like not like in a compulsive way, but like it gets you to think about yourself, about your mortality, about your future, and just really build better habits from just a very practical perspective. And that's what I like about it the most.
Do you feel that way every year? Do you come away from it kind of reinvented, rejuvenated, restructured? I don't know what words I'm talking about.
All of the above. And I think the goal is to really, you try to go on this, spiritual and physical and practical high of improving yourself. And you try to maintain that for as long as you can throughout the rest of the year, right? And then so like Ramadan is like the sprint, and then the rest of the year is like, okay, let me just try to maintain this and coast as long as I can, with this higher level of self-awareness. And then Ramadan is kind of another reset button. So I love it. And it's also from like just a purely health perspective. Let's say you don't believe in God, you don't care about that stuff. Just from a purely health perspective, like fasting has a direct correlation to lower heart disease, combat cancer, combat depression. I mean, there's so many physical, physiological, and psychological and mental health benefits of fasting. I highly recommend it to anybody else.
I've done fasting, but not enforced by anybody else. And then mostly it's by accident. And I just go and I look for food, and it's like, there'll be something, but I'm like, I'm not making that. That's too much work. And then I just don't eat until lunch. What if you break the rules? Do you burn in eternal hellfire the way I was told if I broke the rules growing up as a Catholic? If you want to eat, if you're very hungry, and what do you do with the baby? You're not making them fast. It must start at a certain age. And then what if you cheat? What if you have sex? What if you eat? What's the penance for that? What's the view of that?
So for starters, children shouldn't be fasting. You can see behind me this book, Hana the Ramadan Gift. It's a children's book I wrote about Ramadan, about a girl who wants to fast, but she's too young, and she learns how she can still observe Ramadan even though she's not fasting. So, some Muslim parents have their kids fast. I highly disagree with that. But Islamically speaking, you fast when you become an adult, 17, 18, 19, 20, like your adulthood phase, right? And even then, it's really up to you. Some people feel more comfortable at 17 when you're not technically an adult, but, I digress. So the first thing is you fast as an adult. Second thing is you don't fast if you're sick, if you're traveling, if you're pregnant, if you're nursing, if a woman is on her period, you don't fast, right? You have to be perfectly healthy, physically, mentally, spiritually, across the board to fast. So that's one. Two, while you're fasting, if you genuinely accidentally eat something, then it's no big deal. You just stop and you move on as if the fast continued, right? Because sometimes you genuinely forget you're fasting. It happens and you eat something and it's considered not big. Now, if you deliberately break your fast, like you're cheating, well, there's a deeper question, right? One is, if you believe in God and you believe God is omnipotent and all-knowing, then you really can't cheat, right? Because He would, by definition, know. And so in that point, I would ask you, do you really want to be fasting in the first place? Now, if somebody has like a moral weakness and they break down and they eat deliberately, then the penance for that is 60 days of fasting. So it's kind of a pretty rough.
Oh, dear God.
Yeah, penance. So it's kind of a strong deterrent in that sense. But really, the broader question I always bring up to folks is that if you're not even convinced about Islam or fasting or God, well, that's a deeper question. Like, don't cheat yourself and don't kid yourself. Spend the time understanding what you believe, why you believe it, and once you've made that decision, then move forward. But there's no compulsion in Islam. There's no compulsion in religion. I can't force somebody to believe something. And so it's silly to force someone to take a behavior when they don't believe it in the first place.
That's very diplomatic of you. Do you think that I'm not as good of a person as you are. Do you think it's rude when your non-practicing friends tell you about what they've eaten today? Because I think that would be rude.
No, not at all.
All right, then I had the most. No,
go for it.
No.
We live in a practical society where I can't impose on you I'm fasting, so therefore you're fasting.
You look away at an ad of a delicious meal.
I do look away at the ads of a delicious meal. I just don't need that kind of negativity in my life right now.
Fair enough. It's really interesting to hear. You talk about that. It's always fascinating to me. I need more discipline in my life. I've got a pretty good practice that I've been doing daily, and I'm not as consistent as I'd like to be. Do you have what part? Maybe it's religious, maybe it's something else. You're a man of a certain age. You've got young kids. You see what's happening in the world. You're trying to make everything work and lead and be a good guy. How do you get up and not lose your mind every day?
Yeah, I mean, Pete, I think you and I probably agree on this. We've talked about this before, that for me, I look at the long-term picture of life. I ask myself the deathbed question, which sounds kind of dramatic, but it's sincere. If somebody sends me something nasty on Twitter, I'm like, is this going to matter to me on my deathbed? It's not. I ignore it and move on. If it's a death threat, I'll report it, of course, but I'm not worried about these things. I'm, and I've said this before, I'm focused on how do we solve world hunger? How do we solve racism, the epidemic of sexual abuse? How do we solve homelessness, these epidemics that are ravaging our society right now, right? How do we address them in a way that's meaningful and consequential? And the actions I take try to reflect that. That doesn't mean I don't have fun or that I'm all doom and gloom. I joke around, I have fun, I tell dad jokes, I do all the stuff that you should do to have a good time. But my focus is that we have such bigger issues in life to solve that I can't be distracted by these things. And I try to raise my kids with that mentality as well, that have fun, enjoy life, but remember, said Muhammad Ali quote, that service to others is the rent you pay for your time here on earth. And so I just try to infuse in them that whenever your time comes, just make sure you've paid your rent.
I like all of that, but does that mean that you yourself don't ever get either crippled with fear or anxiety or even some kind of depression of some sort, or whatever adjective you want to use, a period of time where you're kind of really struggling emotionally? Does that happen for you?
Absolutely. I think everybody goes through a period where they're like, I'm exhausted. I'm mentally exhausted. I would be lying through my teeth if I said, no, I'm great all the time and I don't struggle. I mean, maybe there are people like that, and kudos to them and more power to them. But I think it's human to be vulnerable. It's human to recognize you can't do it all. And everybody has, a way of resetting. And for me, I've got family, my wife, I've got my kids, I've got prayer. I go running, I work out. I mean, I find ways to have a release that's productive and constructive. And even despite that, there are days where I'm just like, I'm exhausted.
Yep.
I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But again, that's really where I kind of reflect on the bigger picture that I'm trying to achieve, why I'm doing what I do. And I try to push on and move on. And faith plays a big role in that for me. And that's for me. That's not for me to convince of somebody else that, therefore it's the right faith for you, or it's the right faith, period. That I don't like that type of verbiage. But what I will say is that for me, based on my experience of faith, it's a big part of my life and a big part of my internal strength and my internal health, internal mental health, internal physical health. I would never put that upon somebody else, but I shared that just as context, that for me, it's a mixture of the physical and the spiritual that allows me to maintain a sense of confidence and sanity and optimism about the future.
Do you pray 5 times?
Yeah, at least 5 times a day.
Do you think there are equivalents to that are different practices? Because to me, I can understand how that would help a person reset. It's almost like, I don't want to insult it or your practice, but it's almost like just a moment of being present and not being distracted by the outside world. I mean, you can make it more religious if you want, but there's other ways to kind of have that for people who aren't religious, prayerful, or Muslim, doing it 5 times a day. Do you think?
Yeah, I don't see that as an insult at all, Pete. I think that's a compliment. I think you're exactly right.
Okay.
It's a way of being present. And again, if people really want to nitpick, you go back to the Prophet Muhammad before he was 40, right? Islam wasn't revealed to him until he was 40. So what did he do the first 40 years of his life? He would meditate. He would pray in his own way, right? And it wasn't the way Muslims pray now. That was, we believe, taught to him by God that this is the quote unquote right way to pray. But the idea that this is the one magical way to pray and there's no other way and it's all rejected, that's a fundamentalist kind of a really exclusionary approach that I think is just, that's insulting to me. I feel like people will find their connection in their own way. And I don't want to sit here and say, there's no such thing as truth and we're all truth and that kumbaya stuff. I don't go that far left, to be honest with you. But at the same time, I also would never sit here and dictate to somebody that this is the right way and that's the wrong way. And the way you're doing it is wrong. That's just silly to me. If you find your connection through a particular means of prayer or meditation, more power to you. If it makes you a better person, more power to you.
Yeah. I mean, if the question on the table is, how do I become a more peaceful, calm, happy person? How do I avoid suffering, anxiety, depression? There are a number of different ways to do that and answers, and you're offering yours and saying that as long as you have something that helps you find that, that's awesome. And, as long as it doesn't hurt other people, that should be spread. That's what I'm hearing you say. And I think that's important that you look at it that way. Given all of that, when you see that children have been shot in a school, how do you keep going there? How do you see hope in a place where, at the state level, because of activism, we've created a whole bunch of new laws. And I always like to remind people that people say, oh, nothing ever happens. Not true. We have a whole bunch of organizations, nonprofits, several I've had on there, and I'm sure you've interviewed their presidents and other activists all over the country, and they're changing state laws, which make a difference. But the concern, of course, is those state laws could be challenged at the Supreme Court, which is now occupied by people who think babies should carry pistols openly in church and school and their kindergarten, and more guns the better. And so it becomes this kind of really spiraling doom for a lot of us. How do you deal with it when something like last week, or frankly every day, happens?
I mean, you mourn. First of all, you acknowledge the horror of 3 sweet, innocent children being stripped away from us, just as how many dozens were stripped away at Parkland and Uvalde, and 179 some school shootings over the last couple of decades, and it's too many to count. So you mourn, right? You look at the human element of it and you mourn, and you send your condolences, and you acknowledge the humanity stripped away, and then you get back to work. And that's the only way I've known how to do it. And I think what's frustrating to me is, I was talking to a friend of mine about this yesterday, that the debate has become so bizarre now because we're bringing up facts and logic and proven pieces of legislation that we know work. And these gun sycophants are completely just antithetical to anything based on common sense. And by the way, I say this with my brother is a U.S. Marine. I grew up shooting guns. Our parents took us hunting and taught us proper gun safety. Yeah. I'm not some anti-gun, whatever you want to call me. I recognize and appreciate safe guns usage and firearms. I mean, I get it. I've fired many weapons myself. I get it. I don't understand how we can have a conversation when these folks are just so beyond common sense. If I have one more person look at my bio and say, "Oh, what about Chicago?" I'm going to lose it. Because Chicago is not even in the top 25 most dangerous gun violence cities in the country. And 60% of the illegal guns in Chicago come from where? Wisconsin and Indiana. Because these things called roads exist. And you can drive on them from one state to another and bring illegal guns in. The majority of illegal guns in Mexico are from the United States. If anybody should be building a wall, it should be the Mexicans to keep us out because we keep sending illegal guns over there. And so, every developed country in the world has demonstrated that you can have freedom and peace and safety and common sense gun reform. And for some bizarre reason, the fear factor here of these folks on the right, they live in such fear that I need to have a gun with me at any time because aliens might descend and I need to shoot them. It's mind-boggling to me. And so for me, that's the frustration. It's the pain of losing children, and then the frustration of dealing with these NRA sycophants who just aren't in the same reality that we're in, it seems like.
How are your kids doing? How is the conversation in your community? My daughters are 15 and 18, and my younger one has always had this on her mind. I think my older one deals a little bit better with it, but the idea that either of them ever have to think about something that we didn't growing up in America till I feel like Columbine is what really, changed a lot in schools when it comes to shooting. How are your kids dealing with it, and what do you talk to parents? What do you say to them?
Yeah, I was a junior in high school when Columbine happened, and I remember thinking, this is horrific. It dominated the news cycle for a month, right? We remember that. And I remember thinking, well, as horrific as this is, I'm sure the folks in power are going to make sure this never happens again. And lo and behold, 7 years later, George Bush and the Republicans lift the assault weapons ban, and we've seen the number of mass shootings accelerate almost exponentially after that. My kids it's almost like talking to them about an ancient time when there weren't mass shooting drills, or when there wasn't, they talk about it like the time before cell phones. What a weird world to live in. No mass shooting. Like you don't have internet, you don't have mass shooting drills, you don't have cell phones. What a weird world. That's what they equate it to. It's that much in their psyche. And, we just talk about, following the teacher's instructions. But as a parent, what do you, there's nothing you can say to prepare them, right? I can prepare my kids to deal with racism and Islamophobia and bullying in general, but I can't prepare them for a mass shooting. I don't want to have to prepare them for a mass shooting, but that's kind of the world we live in. So I don't know how to prepare them for that because it's just such an absurd thing to have to even talk about.
I do. I give them an odds game. That's what I do. I say, listen, anything's possible. It's possible that I could get struck down by lightning right now. A tree could fall on my car. It's possible. It is still, even though we have these terrifying statistics, still very highly unlikely that something like this is going to happen in your school. And then I just kind of feel that, and when I say that, I haven't promised them that they'll be safe, but I've tried to give them a rational way of looking at the danger that gun violence or any other thing poses to them in their lives? There's no real good answer, but that's the best I can do.
7-year-old will run into my arms when there's thunder after lightning because she's scared, right? Like, what am I going to teach her about a mass shooting? She's too innocent to know what that is right now, and I kind of want to keep it that way.
Yeah, that's fair. That's it. Yeah. To be fair, I run into my daughter's arms during thunder, which she finds very strange. So you're a grown man. It's thunder. Back to your room, sir.
You've raised strong young women.
They're not nearly as concerned about the thunder as I am. Are you watching? What are your thoughts on the fact that Donald Trump has been indicted? You're an attorney. You have thoughts on the legal system, the white collar crime, violent crime, priorities, punishment, all of it. What do you think of the president of the United States, a former president for the first time, being indicted for a crime like this?
I think one of the biggest mistakes our country ever made in modern times was letting Nixon off the hook. You can draw a straight line from Nixon to Trump. And had Nixon been prosecuted and upheld and precedent had been set that this kind of corruption will not stand. And by the way, I looked up the data. I tweeted it out. I can pull it up. But there have been like a couple of dozen heads of states of countries. Many of them are allies that have been indicted and convicted of crime. So it's not like we're, unprecedented in the world. If anything, among developed countries especially, the fact that we haven't prosecuted our heads of state for criminal actions is what makes us the outlier and the anomaly, which doesn't make any sense. So I think what we're seeing with Donald Trump is it's a step forward. I don't think it's nearly enough to accommodate all the criminal activities he's been involved in, including the classified information, which the latest reports show that even after the subpoena, he sifted through and looked through the classified documents to see which ones he wanted to give back and which ones he didn't, which shows intent as well, because he knew he wasn't supposed to have them. So, what I find really remarkable, maybe I shouldn't, is watching the folks on the right who lambasted Bill Clinton for having an affair and saying that this, stains our country, it stains our reputation, it stains the Constitution. And now looking at Donald Trump, who paid an adult film star hush money, I think 6 weeks after his son was born, while having an affair with his wife, and then did so as a means to prevent his campaign from being harmed, almost exactly as John Edwards did, and hold him up as like this moral beacon and icon and say it's a witch hunt, or call it political prosecution. First of all, it can't be political prosecution because he wasn't president when he committed this criminal act. It was before he was president. So you can't even talk about presidential immunity. This wasn't like he was a president who took an action on war or policy that people disagreed with. He violated FEC law while a private citizen. Now the rule that you want us to hold on to is that anything ever done in the past, even prior to being elected president, is fair game. I mean, it's absurd. So while I'm glad that the DA Bragg is holding firm and moving forward on this due process of law, I also hope that the other dominoes also fall and Donald Trump faces accountability for the other criminal acts that he most certainly has committed. I mean, we can talk more about that, but I see this as a step in the right direction. I won't be content until there's an actual conviction.
You won't be content until there's a conviction, but your point is one about accountability. And you started, pointing to Nixon, and I think I really agree. I think that matters a lot across the political spectrum, that there's accountability. And I don't know if the right and left agree on, anything at all anymore about what direction the planet turns. I talk about Earth 1 and 2 that it seems like we live on, but I do feel like a lot of people think that if you do cheat, if you do commit a crime, you should be held accountable for it, and we can disagree on what that might mean, but that's the point. You mentioned other countries, but you could talk about the Iraq War, the financial crisis. There hasn't been enough accountability for powerful people in this country. There has in other countries, whether it be in the government or the private sector. There's oil pouring into the Gulf. Where's the accountability? The OxyContin, the Sackler family, where's the accountability? They're usually financial penalties, and that's not that the businesses and wealthy people call that cost of doing business. So I just wanted to say I fully agree, and I think the point about accountability is such an important, sad lack in American history, certainly recent American history.
I completely agree. And I mean, I think there's something poetic about Donald Trump having to walk into the same courthouse that the exonerated five were in. And Trump took out the front page New York Times ad calling for their execution for something that they were innocent of, and has never once apologized for his own actions. So there's something deeply karmic about that. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see where it goes.
I feel like I was thinking yesterday about something that I can't believe we stopped talking about it, but there's a new thing with Donald Trump every day. And I wish that he wasn't running, and I wish that we just could stop talking about it. But I don't think we can, because he's out there and he's still got so many people's attention, it would seem. But Qasim, when he said on tape, you can grab women by the pussy, and people then voted for him a couple weeks later, I don't, like, my brain stopped then. And then COVID and the insensitivity around death and the idea that, I don't want to wear a mask. Why couldn't we just be like, hey, listen, I don't know if this mask works or not, but if, on the off chance that I might be protecting something, I'm going to go ahead and wear it when I'm in the convenience store or whatever. Like, we don't really care, it seems, if people die or if people get assaulted, unless we know them personally. Like, this kind of the culture of our country has devolved, it would seem, so much. And I wonder how we get back if we keep having role models and we keep elevating people like Donald Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson. Like, they're just terrible, dishonest people that used to not be able to get away with that behavior in America, media, or government. I don't know how to change that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any simple answer. I think there's a number of things we can think about. One is, and I think we've talked about this before, maybe we have, maybe we haven't. I was on with Joe Walsh on his show, where I said the only difference between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump is Reagan was more eloquent. I mean, and I mean that. I mean, he was more eloquent than Trump. But when you look at every racist or bigoted or discriminatory policy Trump had, you can point to Reagan and find a very similar policy. Look at his response to the AIDS crisis. How many LGBTQ Americans died because he mocked and ridiculed it? Look at his response to black people. He called the African delegation monkeys. He popularized the welfare queen trope. He expanded the war on drugs targeting black communities and Latino communities. So, he started a trickle-down scam, which has led to a transfer of wealth of $50 trillion from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. And so everything Trump did was just exactly what Reagan did, just more, blunt and brutal. And so, when you talk about why are we here now, I think this is where the GOP and the right-wing, very right-wing conservative base has always been. And they're just more open about it now. And they didn't like the fact that they had to censor themselves, because at the end of the day, the United States never had any kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the way South Africa did after apartheid, the way Germany did after the Holocaust. Yeah. The United States went through the Native American genocide, African slavery, and 100 years of Jim Crow, and then just said, oops, okay, we'll stop. Maybe, maybe not. But there's no actual accountability. God forbid there was a slightest bit of reparations paid. And so when you have that kind of an environment, you can't just put a bandage over it and pretend it's been healed or fixed. It just never has been healed or fixed. And that's what I try to share, that the work that we have to do is to first recognize the damage that's been done, and then work to undo that, the systemic injustices committed. Even just right now, and I'll stop my rant with this, even right now in Mississippi, the state legislature has passed legislation that Governor Tate Reeves is about to sign that would strip away the rights of prosecutors and judges in Jackson, which is 80% black, and give full authority to an all-white, statewide elected Republican to decide who are going to be the judges and prosecutors for the 80% black city. I mean, if that's not modern-day Jim Crow and white supremacy, I don't know what is. And so to answer your question, Pete, until we can have meaningful truth and reconciliation, we're not going to get there. And this is why the GOP is working hard to ban books about racism and history, because they want to continue that injustice into the future.
No, it's a great answer. That the answer to how we change culture is really hard, but the point being that Reagan was the one who really changed policy so drastically that it destroyed generations of Americans and destroyed, the way I want to say it, it destroyed opportunity. It destroyed so much opportunity for education, employment, healthcare, and we're barely grabbing some of that back, especially through Obamacare. But as we head into the future of our kids, it's hard to know where we're going to go with that policy fight, especially, again, given the Supreme Court. But you mentioned the book banning, and I wanted to ask you that. When you hear woke and these anti-woke rhetoric and policies, what do you tell your listeners? What do you hear? How should we perceive that?
Yeah, they say woke because they can't say the N-word any longer. That's it. I mean, that's the answer, right? And I'm not the one who came up with that. There's plenty of much more knowledgeable and experienced Black speakers and scholars who have mentioned this, and I'm just following their lead. Yeah, it's true. It's true. They're saying woke because they can't say the N-word because that's impolite company now. But anything that is remotely something that encourages empathy or compassion or nuance or accommodation for somebody else is now considered woke. And it's so silly. There's, Brianna Joy had that, what's her face, this right-wing nut job on her show, and asked her to define woke, and her brain broke because she couldn't define it because they've basically made it up. And in fact, DeSantis's lawyers were asked by a court to define woke, and they actually defined it pretty well as a belief that there are systemic injustices in place that marginalize, Black, brown, and other, underrepresented communities. Not a bad definition at all. And so what I tell people is that when you hear somebody say that, ask them to first define it, and then second, focus on what is wrong with basic equal access for everyone. Right? It's that old saying that, when you've had privilege your entire life, equality feels like oppression. And that's really what's happening here. And it's so silly to me that, and I'll rant about Democrats in a second, just so your conservative listeners, if you have any, don't feel left out. It's just so silly to me that we're buying into these culture wars. And I think the way Democrats need to respond to them is not by buying into the culture wars, but by leading by example and just getting stuff done. Fighting for working families, making sure we're elevating things like the living wage. We're, getting rid of food deserts. We're getting rid of medical deserts. We're expanding access to basic social functions. The idea that the only solution to crime is, increasing police budgets doesn't make any sense to me either. I mean, we could talk about that too, but there's so many things that Democrats can do to combat this woke culture war that I think some are doing a great job of, but we have a lot more work to do if we're going to win this ideological battle.
Go ahead. Where do you think the Democrats are coming up short or being hypocritical or whatever?
Well, let's talk about policing and law enforcement for a second, right? I mean, much has been made about the 1994 crime bill that many Democrats now oppose and say, "Yeah, it was a mistake. We shouldn't have done that." But the response by the Biden administration, and by the way, I voted Biden, and if he runs for election again, I'm going to vote for Biden again. So I'm holding him accountable because that's what you get to do when you vote for somebody. You get to, vote for who you think is the best person, then you hold their feet to the fire to be the best person. Indeed. But his response is, we're going to add 100,000 more cops. And my whole point is, you're buying into the Republican playbook of more cops, more cops, more cops. Look, I train law enforcement officers on Fourth Amendment constitutional protections. I have worked in the prison system in mentoring returning citizens for a long time. I'm deeply intertwined with understanding how our criminal justice system works, with how law enforcement works. I get it. I'm not by any means slamming cops or bashing cops. What I am saying is we have to fund public safety. And we don't just fund public safety by throwing more guns and more armed patrol officers in the streets. That's just not how it works. That leads to escalation. Militarization of police, study after study shows, leads to escalation and distrust. But what does work, and what the data does show, is that more than 90% of 911 calls made are for non-violent, non-criminal activity. What sense does it make to send an armed agent of the state for a non-violent and non-criminal activity? So civil infractions. So my idea of what Democrats should be doing is recognize that law enforcement responds to crime. But what prevents crime is a living wage, adequate housing, adequate healthcare, adequate education, clean food and water, clean environments, healthy food. Invest in those. If we know that 59% of people in federal prisons and 48% of people in state prisons have a mental health issue, a diagnosed mental health issue, what that tells us is that our federal prison system and our state prison system, state jail system, are the largest mental hospitals in the country, which is absurd because you wouldn't take somebody who's got a broken leg and send them to prison. You would send them to a hospital. So why aren't these people in a hospital getting treatment for their mental health condition? Right. Why? Because we don't have the funds for it. Why? Right. Because we're putting 100,000 more cops and not building 10,000 more hospitals. And that's fundamental, or 1,000 more hospitals. That's fundamentally where I think Democrats are missing this golden opportunity to say, the data tells us, the facts tell us that you fund public safety by removing the barriers to access of justice that people need. And we're going to fund more mental health hospitals. We're going to fund better grocery stores. We're going to fund more small businesses because those things actually prevent and reduce crime. If Democrats came out and focused on that and built upon that proven model, I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat, you're going to fall in love with that and you're going to absolutely support that going forward.
You are a super smart guy who has been doing really good, important work for a long time, which is why I love to have you on my show. But you host your own show and talk to a lot of smart people. So here at the end, to kind of end on a positive note, or at least a recommendation, who's somebody that you've talked to on your show, or somebody, an author that you're reading? Give us a suggestion that we can look to next, Qasim.
I had this brilliant guy on my show a few months ago. His name was Pete Dominic.
Yes, that was quite a segment. It was a ratings bonanza.
It was fantastic. I can't tell you how great that was. No, yeah, the Qasim Rashid show on Sirius XM Review Channel 126 every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern. Definitely tune in. No, we have great folks. We've had everyone from Dr. Mary Trump to Dr. Bernice King, Congresswoman Marie Newman, and just a wide range of scholars from across faith, culture, gender. It's a lot of fun. And we talk about everything from voting rights to racial justice to gender justice to Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. And so check us out. And if you like what you see, then subscribe.
Thank you very much for joining me as always, buddy. It's great to talk to you. And I look forward to talking to you again soon, man. Thank you.
Peace out.
Peace out. Qasim Rashid, everybody. Go check him out on SiriusXM on Sundays. Go to his website, QasimRashid.com. Follow him on Twitter. Subscribe to his newsletter. And that's it. That's all I've got for you. Thank you very much, Qasim. That was awesome. As well as Michael Cohen earlier. Go read his article. Subscribe to that, of course. Michael, a regular contributor to the show. It's great to have him. It's always great to have you. I can't do it without you. I wouldn't do it without you. I mean, that'd be weird for me to just talk into this microphone without you. I probably would do it, knowing me, because I love it so much. But I do need to be able to pay my bills. So sign up for a paid subscription right now at standuppete.com, patreon.com/Pete Dominic. That is it. That is all. Zip it up, zip it out. John Carroll taking us out. Lots of good stuff planned for you this week. So stay tuned and stay listening to Stand Up. I love you guys. Bye-bye.
Stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels been leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up. Oh, got to stand up. Ooh, come on, just stand up. Everybody got to stand up in the darkest hour. Stand up. People got the power. Stand up. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Come on, come on, come on. Stand up.